Hi everyone, almost Shabbat Shalom. My name is Rabbi Noah Bickart, and I'm pleased to be talking about this week's Parsha, which is Parshat Ekev. And so I'd like to treat a little bit of a section of the Parsha, not with the commentaries that you might normally associate with the Torah, but actually some Talmudic passages which might be relevant to this section. So here we are, and hopefully you can see this on your screen as I can, with the beginning of Deuteronomy chapter 8. Kol ha-mitzvah asher anochi mitzavacha hayom tishmerun la'asot leman techiyun urvitem uvatem virishtem et haaretz asher nishba Adonai la'avotechem. And I'll translate all the commandments which I am commanding you to this day. You shall take care of, you shall do them in order that you can live, that you can multiply, go in and possess the land which God has sworn to you. I guess I'll continue in English. And you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God led you these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble you, and to prove you, really to test you, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep God's commandments or not. So this is sort of the core message of Moses' great second speech here, and an interesting take on what it is that the commandments mean. But there's an interesting grammatical feature, an interesting feature of the language which I'd like to focus on, which is even though the clear sense of this passage is that what Moses is talking about is all of the commandments in the plural, oddly, in Hebrew, the word is kol ha-mitzvah in the singular, all of the commandment. And maybe even more strangely, this odd feature of the language is repeated once again in this passage when the people are commanded to remember all the ways, all the pathways they have journeyed on from Egypt until this point. Similarly, is spoken about as kol haderech, all the way in the singular. And so this odd grammatical feature, which again, it's quite odd. Doesn't Moses know biblical Hebrew? Shouldn't he be able to say kol hadrachim, all of the ways, kol ha-mitzvot, all of the commandments? Why is Moses talking about this in the singular? And I think I'd like to argue that the answer to be found to this is really to be found in a section of the Mishnah. And here, if you see in the next box on your screen, we have a Mishnah from Tractate Kiddushin, which says as follows: those who perform a single commandment, it is good for them. Their days are lengthened and they inherit the land. But those who do not perform any single commandment, it is not good for them. Their days are not lengthened and they do not inherit the land. Okay? So once again, we see, and I think perhaps in an odd kind of way, it might well be that the authors of the Mishnah here are almost imitating Moses' strange formulation, because you might have expected this passage to say, those who perform the commandments, those who don't perform the commandments. Another interesting feature of this text, of course, is that it contrasts those who do a commandment with those who don't do a commandment, as opposed to those who do a commandment, as opposed to those who sin, or something like that. But this is an interesting question. Really? Just a single commandment is enough to get all of this stuff? And once again, this stuff here in the Mishnah is seemingly precisely the same stuff that Moses is talking about. Long life, life in the land, good things happen to you. So these things seem to relate to one another. Well, the Talmud, when it analyzes this Mishnah, is perplexed. Because, as I'm sure you know, rabbinic texts say all kinds of things like this. And in fact, the Talmud uses another text, which is likely familiar to some of you from the liturgy, and says as follows. The Talmud says here, this Mishnah that says all you have to do is do one mitzvah in order to get all this good stuff. Well, there's another Mishnah which seems to say something very different. And it says as follows: our Mishnah contradicts the following text. These are the things, the fruit of which a person eats or benefits from in this world, while the principle remains for the future world. And then there's a list: honoring one's parents, practice of loving kindness, hospitality to wayfarers, making peace between one person and another, and the study of Torah surpasses them all. So it would seem like, unlike our Mishnah, the Mishnah in Kiddushin, which says all you have to do is pick one mitzvah, the Talmud is quoting another text here from the Mishnah in Peah, which says there are a certain number of mitzvot, which if you do them, they are super special. But not any mitzvah, only this small list. So Rav Yehuda comes along with a brilliant solution. He says, what is our mitzvah talking about? What is our Mishnah talking about? It's talking about if a person is precisely balanced, right? Their mitzvah points and their mitzvah negative points are precisely equal in their life. And if that's the situation where the scales of divine justice are precisely balanced, that's the situation in which if you do one mitzvah, well, it tips the scales to your situation in such a way that you end up inheriting all of the wonderful things that you're supposed to do. Great. So this is maybe a nice way to think about maybe what Moses is saying. There may be a hint when Moses says kol ha-mitzvah in the singular, that every time we come to do a mitzvah, we should imagine ourselves as precisely even in our lives. If the balance between the good things we've done and the bad things we've done are precisely equal, and when that mitzvah is the opportunity to do a mitzvah is presented to ourselves, we should see ourselves as needing only one thing to tip ourselves over into the side of good. And as we're beginning to think about the high holidays, this is exactly the message of the high holidays, right? That there are two books up there, and we're trying to make sure that the book of good deeds is thicker than the book of bad deeds, or the book of failure to live up to our values, failure to do good deeds. So that's Rav Yehuda in the Babylonian Talmud. In the Yerushalmi, in the Jerusalem Talmud, there's a different sort of approach. And here I just want to go to the end, where Rabbi Zera says this is the case of an uncertain sin. Forget about that. Don't want to talk about that. Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Boone, says this is someone who picks a special mitzvah for themselves and never fails to do it. And so this is a very different approach to one mitzvah, anybody who does one mitzvah. It's not that the scales are balanced, and if you do one, you are then tipped over into the good side. No, rather, people should pick a mitzvah for themselves, and it could be any mitzvah. It could be one from the list of which we saw. Hospitality is unfortunately something we can't do to the same degree we once did in this COVID world. It could be that people really focus on tefillah, focus on kashrut, focus on Shabbat, focus on honoring your parents, focusing on the study of Torah is a really excellent one. But Rabbi Yossi, the son of Rabbi Boone, is saying, and in some ways I think is saying that Moses is saying, that the reason for this particular strange formulation of kol ha-mitzvah, all the commandments, singular, as opposed to kol ha-mitzvot in the plural, really that Moses is encouraging us to pick one mitzvah, that you don't have to do everything, you don't have to be a perfect human being, you don't have to be a perfect Jew, but that if everybody were to pick one special mitzvah for themselves, that really would be enough in some sense in order to tide one over into gain all the kinds of benefits. And I think that's a very beautiful message for this time. I also think it's a neat way to think about Torah shebichtav, the written Torah. Sometimes the best way to understand the written Torah is really to go to the oral Torah. Because even though it doesn't always quote the texts of the Torah the way maybe we're expecting, it uses the same kind of language and can help deepen our message. So I hope there's something here that you can think about over Shabbat. Thanks very much, and Shabbat Shalom.